Evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are now about to start the meeting. We've gone live as well on the stream. So if I can have a bit of quiet, we can get the meeting underway. So apologies for absence and substitutions. I haven't had any. So then urgent matters. I haven't received any urgent matters. Are there any pressing? Okay. And any declarations of interest? No. Okay, thanks very much. Matters to be considered in private. Again, I haven't had any of these. And is there anybody else that wants to bring any of those up? No. Okay, we'll move on. Right. So just to kind of set the stall, this is a slightly different way of doing this meeting tonight. The reason being is this part of the consultation for the local development plan or draft plan. And so for this meeting, we wanted to open it up and make sure that residents and local groups have the opportunity to make representations for the areas of interest within the draft plan. So this is very much everybody welcome that is here, and thanks to the officers and democratic services that have organised this meeting. But I just want to make it really, really clear that we all want to listen to everybody. And so I'd like to make sure that people are respectful of each other and allow for each of the representatives to speak without being interrupted. And I'd really appreciate that, because we want to allow for the committee to be able to listen and hear your views, and also, you know, allow for all of the other speakers to be able to make their points clearly as well. So thank you very much. I will move on to our list. Right, so 2 seconds, we've got, right. So minutes from the previous meeting, which was on the 22nd of November 2022, are they agreed? Oh, Councillor?
It's a bit trivial, but my name's spelt wrong on, where is it? Page 7.
Okay, noted, we'll change that.
Noted.
Yeah, thank
Sorry.
you. Okay, so we have so each of the speakers is been allowed a kind of a 5-minute interval to speak, and then we will have you know, if there's any points of clarification or any questions that have come up, we will have that. It's not a Q&A session for councillors and for officers. It's more that if there are clarity issues that need to be addressed, then we'll address them after each and every person spoken. So our first person to speak is Kay Garmison.
With only 5 minutes to speak, I can't cover the full scope of Ealing Matters submission to the consultation, so I'll use what's said about housing to illustrate some of the broader issues we have with the consultation local plan, which I'll call CLP for short. The CLP contains 4 policies dealing specifically with housing: 2 for affordable housing, 1 on large-scale purpose-built shared living, expensive bed sits to you and me, and 1 on financial contributions from small sites. There are a further 2 which do not mention housing, but based on the past few years are intimately linked, namely tall buildings and enabling development. Nowhere in the document is there any projection for either the borough as a whole or for any of the 7 towns of the total amount of housing, either affordable or not, to be delivered over the 15-year period covered by the plan. This is despite the fact that 2 documents in the evidence base, the local housing need assessment and the housing supply topic paper, base their assumptions around a figure of 40,000 plus additional housing units for the 20 years from 2020 to 21 to 2040 to 41. And the population growth that all this new housing implies. Moreover, the housing supply paper states that capacity allocations have been determined for all site allocations forming part of the Regulation 18 plan, where these contain an identified residential component. But these are not included in the plan to enable people to see how their area will be affected, despite government guidance, which states that where sites are proposed for allocation, sufficient detail should be given to provide clarity to developers, local communities, and other interested parties about the nature and scale of development. So why so coy? Many residents from all parts of the borough are unhappy with the development that has taken place since the last local plan was adopted, as illustrated by the State of Ealing report produced by Ealing Residents Associations, the report of the Ealing Race Equality Commission, and Shaping Ealing. Yet the CLP talks repeatedly about growth, and Chapter 3, Para 3.43 suggests that population growth is an aspiration for the borough without attempting to quantify it. Why has there been no conversation with residents about this elephant in the room prior to the production of the CLP? This push for growth would have a detrimental impact on other important aspects of the plan. Others will no doubt challenge specifically the proposals to change the designation of Greenbelt and MOL as weakening the protection they're afforded. I'd just like to point out that this is clearly driven by the push for residential development sites. The same is true for Ealing Town Centre, where under the CLP, buildings would have to be 21 stories before they would be considered as tall. And this slap bang in the middle of multiple conservation areas and at odds with the character study for this location. Ealing Town Centre is further compromised as the sole destination for large-scale purpose-built shared living. This seems to be just another way of perpetuating unsustainable amounts of development in a borough with limited land availability. As for infrastructure, a topic paper identifies the issues, but the CLP, Chapter 3, Para 3.36, says only that an infrastructure plan and schedule will be produced at some indeterminate point in the future. Apart from essential infrastructure such as energy and water, social infrastructure will be further eroded by development. An analysis of the development site allocation shows the loss of car parks, auto repair shops, MOT centres, builders and timber merchants, community venues and leisure facilities, among others. While development may incorporate mixed uses, however that's defined, experience shows that these services are unlikely to be replaced. Finally, the NPPF Section 3 plan making states that a local plan should contain policies that are clearly written and unambiguous, so it is evident how a decision maker should react to development proposals. That's not the case with this plan. As an example, take policy ENA, enabling development, Chapter 5, page attached for your information. I challenge you to explain what it actually means. And while Brexit and CO2 are defined in the glossary of terms, rather surprisingly, this, enabling development, and other specialist terms related to spatial strategy are not. In conclusion, the CLP is unsound in terms of contradictory and missing evidence, housing targets that are only deliverable with severe damage to open space, infrastructure, and heritage and conservation, and policies that lack clarity and precision and are thus far too open to interpretation. With as many holes as a Swiss cheese, I submit that this CLP is unfit for purpose. Thank you.
Thank you. Specific and clarity, yeah.
I'll just clarify one point. The clue is in the title. It is a draft local plan. So I make no apologies for the fact there are gaps and omissions. And that is because, as you quite rightly identified, that we haven't got the full evidence base assembled. And you mentioned in particular infrastructure. We have commissioned an infrastructure delivery plan. That infrastructure delivery plan will provide technical evidence, which will enable councils to make decisions on local priorities for infrastructure spend. But I can tell you now, the needs and aspirations for infrastructure in the borough will be far greater than the available resources. So there will be some very difficult decisions ahead for the council in terms of determining future priorities. And I think it's been very useful, very productive during the consultation to get feedback from local communities about local priorities, not just for critical borough-wide kit, but also aspirations for infrastructure in each of the 7 towns. I take the point about soundness, but of course we're not required to meet the test of soundness or legal compliance at this stage. It's a draft plan. Those would be highly relevant at Reg 19, and any deficiencies in the evidence base, therefore, would leave the council exposed. So the plan is a work in progress. And I do think that feedback from the community, including from your group, is absolutely essential in terms of us getting the right plan and the right priorities for the future.
Thank you, Steve. Sorry. We've just had quite a lot of people kind of come in late. So I just wanted to kind of reiterate what I said at the beginning. Okay. I've been chairing, I didn't know that. But I just still want to clarify for this meeting that we're all here to listen to all of the different speakers. And so what I want to make sure is that people aren't interrupted when they're speaking, because it's really important that everybody gets their points across, and everybody that's indicated that they want to speak and make a presentation has done so, and we want to listen to them. So I'd appreciate it if people were respectful in the meeting. Thank you. Okay, the next speaker we've got is Gerald Power, and he's going to be speaking on behalf of 2 different resident groups, which is why he'll have slightly longer to speak.
Right, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and I shall try and get the right distance from the microphone. I suspect my ideas of consultation may vary from Mr. Barton's, but I shall dig in. I'm representing Stop the Towers and the Drayton's Community Association. Together, these organisations have a membership of around 2,000 residents in Ealing. My day job is change management. I've spent the last 20 years working for the Cabinet Office, Department of Communities and Local Government, and a range of local authorities across the UK, planning and implementing change, including major consultations. So I do take some knowledge of consultation into this. Overall, the Drayton's Community Association has been waiting for the local plan for more than 5 years. We've taken a keen interest in it. It's a really important document for the future of Ealing. We're very aware of that importance, and we've made several attempts to engage with Ealing Council to help create that updated plan, but those approaches have always been rebuffed. It's been the wrong time, wrong resources, wrong phase. This makes it very disappointing that I find myself here tonight talking about a local plan that we feel is fundamentally not fit for purpose. At best, we feel it's been a failure to understand the idea of what a consultation process is, which usually implies to talk to people before you write the draft. At worst, we feel it may not be, but it looks like a land grab for Ealing's green belt and metropolitan open land. And while we support every single one of the plan's stated aims, we are convinced that it will not deliver them. We did a survey recently. We haven't had a lot of time, but we got around 700 responses. Of those, less than 2% believed that the plan was capable of delivering most or all of its stated intentions. The rest believed it would only partially deliver, or it would be completely impossible for it to deliver those aims. Now, to go through the key headlines in terms of consultation, I've touched on that. We've been attempting to engage for years. We feel there's been no meaningful engagement on this. We feel for consultation, you should be talking to community groups before pen goes to paper and you get to quite an advanced document like the one that we're talking about tonight. We really think that there are people in Ealing that would help shape this plan, would want to shape it plan, and would have the expertise to help deliver something, truly fit for purpose. That opportunity, we think, has been missed. On housing and infrastructure, we believe that it's fatally flawed. There's no evidence base. This is another feature in terms of land supply, housing supply. Without knowing how much you have built, how much land supply is coming through, how much is in build, we think it's impossible to draft a plan like this or talk about it in a meaningful way. There are no reference points. Between 2011 and 2021, the census shows that Ealing's population increased by 8.5%, which is significantly higher than the London average of 7.7. That increase, we don't see that reflected in the local plan, and that trajectory of travel and the extra burdens that places on Ealing, they're not in there. We think there's been no review of the impact of existing building, things in build, or no assessment of what full looks like. At what point will Ealing be developed to the point where we can take no more? So we believe that this section is flawed. Environmental policies, Ealing Friends of the Earth, who I believe will be talking, have been quite scathing in their analysis of the local plan. We completely endorse their assessment. We think it fails to address the crux issues that Ealing needs to act on in terms of climate emergency and sustainable communities. We believe instead of protecting Greenbelt and metropolitan open land, it looks, it may not be, but it looks like an attempt to open those precious green spaces open to development. In terms of adapting to climate change, we feel those green spaces are absolutely essential in the communities coping with extreme heat, extreme rainfall. This isn't part of the plan. In terms of legacy housing, Ealing has an enormous amount of old buildings, 100 or more years old. It's not addressed how we make them climate resilient and low carbon. It's not looking at pushing for standards in new housing that are truly sustainable. Things like passive housing, housing that can sustain extremes of temperatures. It's not looking at sustainable building policies. I mean, the building next to Percival House, the plan is to demolish it. It's not looked at the issue of embodied carbon and not knocking down buildings that could service another 10 or 20 years. It's also not looking at, it talks about sustainable communities, but it doesn't act on sustainable communities. The planning that's needed to join up communities and make them truly sustainable, it's not in there. Town centres. We completely endorse the need for town centres and the idea of creating sustainable hubs, sustainable areas where people can, that have a 5 or 10 minute neighbourhood, 20-minute neighbourhood, I'm corrected. We don't think that the plan addresses that. It seems to focus entirely on putting more housing units in there and not the need for a coherent, active strategy for economically and socially stable areas. This means that beyond housing, we don't think it's addressing businesses and amenities. It's not creating areas that people want to visit and want to stay in. In terms of affordable homes, I'm sure many others will talk about that, and there are many definitions of affordable. But from our point of view, most of what's being spoken about is not affordable to local residents and their sons and daughters. It's going to probably result in a form of social cleansing. People born in the borough will be moved out. People with money to invest or that can spend on homes will come in. It's also not addressing the issue of different types of housing and developing housing for families so we have truly sustainable areas. It seems to focus on just unit numbers and probably, dormitory areas for people working elsewhere. That links to the issue of age and disability discrimination. We've seen a pattern of proposals for developments that focus on cramming as many units as possible in and not looking at the needs of older people and people with disabilities to be in these developments. In terms of monitoring the plan, we think that the existing plan has not been monitored, and so therefore, there are no adequate proposals for monitoring the new plan. To cut to the end, in conclusion, we feel this plan has been produced without any consultation, not even meaningful consultation, no consultation. We think it should never have got to this stage of development without those conversations. It's going to shape Ealing for perhaps the next 50 years or more. We think it's absolutely essential we get it right. And on behalf of DCA and STT, we ask Ealing Council to rip up this plan and start again with a genuine consultation process. Thank you.
I'd just like the officers to clarify what we've done as part of the consultation process, just to be clear, and how long it's been open, just for the record, please.
The statutory requirement is that we go out to consultation for 6 weeks. Of course, we knew we were going to be straddling the Christmas New Year holidays. So from the outset, the plan was the consultation would last for a minimum of 8 weeks. In response to calls for more time from a number of community groups, including some of those represented here today, we took the decision very early in the new year, straight after Christmas, to extend it by a further 2 weeks, making 10 weeks in total. So that's 4 weeks beyond the statutory minimum. And I've been personally involved in 41 events and activities, including a range of public meetings, workshops, street stalls, and street walking tours, as well as a number of bilateral events, together with a whole clutch of youth and schools events. In fact, some of the speakers I think may well refer to some of those events. So it's quite a lot of activity. We've also had 6 channels by which people can respond, as well as traditional snail mail, letter, which was the mainstay of our consultation efforts last time, together with email. We've had 2 surveys, a short one and a long survey, which has resulted in quite significant returns so far. Of course, the consultation doesn't end until Wednesday, but we've already had in excess of 3,000 responses through the various surveys, plus over 700 emails with representation so far. I suspect that number will go further north, as traditionally you get most of the representations coming in the final week. I'm going to agree, Chair, we can always do more. I would love to do more. We have to obviously work within the project plan that we have to get the local plan over the line and within the available resources of the council. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Right, we will have the next speaker, which is Donald Power.
Good evening. I'm here representing Eating Friends of the Earth. And just for curiosity, we both got the same surname, but we've met for the first time tonight. We're not related. Well, we started reading the plan. And my slides are going to go up, by the way. There were some slides for this. Yep. So the aims of the plan, we very much welcome the commitment to tackle climate crisis as the first of the 3 core themes. But then when we burrowed into the content of the plan, the content appears to increase, not decrease, emissions. And the effect on the emissions of proposals is not analysed or quantified, certainly not in numbers and even general trends. So going into the next slide, please. Oh, it's going to go quite fast to get through them in there. Oh, so that pie chart, which is probably barely visible, basically it comes from a council document for the climate strategy, and it shows the main sources of emissions in the borough. Basically, the great bulk of it, the red and blue bits, are buildings of various sorts, residential and other buildings, and the greyish bit is transport. So 400 of the 500 and something odd pages are essentially a list of new building sites in the plan, which isn't exactly going to bring down carbon emissions. What do we want to do to bring down carbon emissions is deal with the building section, which means a massive retrofit program. And this is being talked widely across the country, really. People know we need this. So construction on the scale proposed is only going to increase carbon emissions, especially where tall buildings are included. Next slide, please. So what about that new build? Although I've just said we're not very much welcoming it, but such new build as there is should have ultra high levels of efficiency. That's what the Committee on Climate Change nationally are saying. And it needs to meet or exceed the very best standards available. Well, BREEAM is a building standard. I'm no expert on it, but this is from a BREEAM document. So they say if you meet the highest level of their standard, which is outstanding, you can get a 66% drop in emissions. If you look at the little bubble to the right, if you can see it, that's what you get for very good, a 15% drop in emissions. So taking as an example one of the new builds of Friary Park Estate, they meet very good. Did that cost them a lot? Well, I honestly don't know, but there's architects suggest that very good costs them a 0.1% to 0.2% uplift compared to more like 5 to 10% for outstanding. And we probably want to do better than outstanding. Some of them from my group did attend one of the sessions that Steve Barton was at, and we talked about offset payments, and I think he did tell us they were too small in the council's opinion, and that some of these buildings might even need retrofit within the next 15 years. So building that sort of building is not good. How am I doing for time? That's good. Okay, I'll have to go faster. Next slide. Next. Oh, yes, thank you. So also we have presented in our detailed presentation details on the effect of tall buildings. There's research in London by UCL on 200 tall buildings that show they're significantly worse for emissions, both in construction and in use. So basically, it's not a good thing if you're trying to bring down carbon. Next slide. 20-minute neighborhoods. So we looked at the 115 proposed residential infill sites. Well, not all is residential, but the great majority is. And the majority is on currently non-residential sites. That's the big blue bit in the pie chart. So we suggest that if you want a 20-minute neighborhood, you don't want to fill in all the space that was previously available for shops, workplaces, community, and so on. And once you put something on it, you won't get it back, very seldom. And oddly enough, I just received this evening a new document that's commissioned by the council, by the consultants Free House Design, on 20-minute neighborhoods. And they say that there's too much development and that you have to maintain those spaces. Okay, next slide. So obviously,
Sorry,
as an
just
environmental
1
group.
minute.
1 minute?
Yeah.
Okay, we're not going to be keen on the removal of Greenbelt and LML. I'll only say that the criteria that appear to be in the plan and the supporting documents are extraordinarily weak. I mean, there are things like you can't see through a brick wall from Gunnersbury Park, the Barons Court, Barons Pond site, etc., etc. And it contradicts Ealing's own climate emergency sustainability strategy. And we think that Greenbelt and MOL, the whole point is their permanence. We'll just watch the national planning says. Next slide. So we were left wondering, is it really a housing strategy? And who are these flats for? Looking at sites that are under construction or proposed, flats are on sale for £500,000 plus. How this is affordable, we don't know. The one near where I live in Mount Anville, half the brochure is in Chinese, and it's on sale in China. So we think it will be interesting to know what proportion of these new homes are actually sold to people abroad or as investments, and what is the target population for Ealing. We think as an environmental group that in a finite world, growth eventually must stop. I wanted to signal
It's
that.
time.
Okay, do I not get an extra half minute?
I've already given you an extra half minute.
Okay. Well, I would urge people to have a look at our consultation online. And lastly, I just want to say that I think it's important that the council is realistic about what it can achieve. To be honest, promising to make the whole of the borough carbon neutral by 2030 is simply unbelievable. I'm an engineer, I have engineer friends, they fall about laughing. So it has to be more realistic and honest, because otherwise it's not a highly naive, it'll make people cynical.
I think there's probably a couple of points of clarification on that.
I mean, some very good points, and just to pick up on that last one, I think that's absolutely right. I agree fundamentally with that. And I think what that exposes the limitations of the planning system in terms of tackling some of the challenges around net zero, what we can realistically do. And just to pick up the stat around retrofitting, we are still building, we're still approving plans for buildings, which we know with the environmental standards coming down the track will need retrofitting in 10 or 15 years. And that's why in the plan, we suggest policies to try and address that through either higher punishment through the carbon offset tax. And I think that would make quite a big difference in terms of forcing a change in mentality on the part of developers going forward. I'll just make one general point, and I think it probably applies to all of the three presentations. It's important to bear in mind the local plan must be read in conjunction with the London plan. The London plan is an integral part of the local development plan. And so therefore, we choose quite deliberately not to duplicate or replicate policies. And there are some very good ambitions and aspirations set out in the London plan for climate change. We don't choose to necessarily repeat those, but what we want to do is to make sure that those aspirations can be delivered. And you will see there are a number of placeholder policies. I'm being very clear about those. We wanted to shape those policies around things like carbon offset and urban greening in consultation with the community before coming forward with a set proposition. And that also reflects the fact that if you go back to the MTPF, it is pretty poor, let's be blunt, in terms of the national policy regime for how you do climate action. It's very specific, very detailed on infrastructure, on housing, on employment matters, but on climate action, it is weak. And very often, local planning authorities And I hope that Ealing will be one of those when we submit our final version of the plan later in the year. Those authorities which have been very aspirational have often come unstuck when they've got to the examination stage, when government appoints an inspector and peruses the draft policies and the evidence supports it. So if we are going to deliver on some of the aspirations, we have to be really realistic about what the planning system can deliver.
Thank you. Okay, we have, sorry, I'm just, we've got, so Mark Paulson is next. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to speak. I'm Mark Paulson. I'm a Church of England minister in Southall, and I'm the convener of the Southall Faiths Forum. And I've been asked to speak on behalf of the Faiths Forum. So this is a faiths perspective, and we've had representations from 40 faith leaders in Southall representing the largest faith communities in the country. We think there are some worthy aspirations in the plan, and we think that they're in danger of not being fulfilled because this is not radical or ambitious enough. And this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. And we're very, very concerned that we don't blow it. So, for instance, we're concerned about community, that building on what other speakers have said, that the word affordable is far from it, that mixed housing is essential, and that local people, particularly in poorer areas, are not excluded by the vast prices, that we look for both parking and no parking, which would be in distinction to some other speakers, in the sense that we're very concerned that the poor are being squeezed out because people who've been made unemployed in some of our factories are now looking to work as Uber drivers, van drivers, and literally have vehicles for survival and have nowhere to park. So we want to take that aspiration and be a lot more radical in terms of transport, in terms of park and ride, in terms of effective bike lanes across areas like Southall. It's extremely dangerous to use a bike. So if we're really serious about inviting people to change their lifestyle, we've got to think about a completely ambitious programme. In terms of creation care, we're concerned that the rewilding of Warren Farm as the most important site for wildlife in the whole of West London is in peril. And we would like to make representation strongly that this could be an easy win for Ealing Council to reassure residents of the borough that Warren Farm will be untouched. We would like protection for allotments for people who do not have gardens in areas like Southall. And we would like to see more respect for the past and our cultural assets, which are disappearing quickly. So one of the things that people look back on was the artistic and cultural renaissance in Southall in the 1970s, where there were buildings for performance, for rehearsals, for artistic endeavour. Those have gone, and we would like to see the soul put back into Southall. We'd like to see young people central to this plan and not fobbed off with a few snooker and ping pong tables, but with centres for aspiration. So really to put young people centre. In all things, as faith leaders, we'd like to say that decision-making needs to be transparent. And I think there's a perception at the moment that not all decision-making has been transparent. And finally, we want each of those 7 town centres within the borough of Ealing, which, remember, as a place, as a borough, has as many people as Leicester or Nottingham. It needs to be seen to be a place where we invest massively, once in a lifetime, in creative, dynamic, mixed communities where there are spaces for aspiration and change. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Can we go to the next speaker, who is Oscar Paulson, please?
Good evening. I'm Oscar. I live in Southall and I'm the head student at Twyford Church of England High School in Acton. Last week, Ezra and her team came into Twyford to ask a panel of sixth formers, including myself, what we thought of the local developments happening both in Acton and across the borough. Young people have often been overlooked in the consultation processes in the past, even though many of the developments in Ealing will affect us the most. So it was great to be able to give our opinions despite the absolutely freezing weather outside. Housing was the main talking point in our discussions. Many young people in the borough have lived here all their lives and have a deep connection with West London as a unique area for opportunities, culture and connections. Despite the surge in flats that are being proposed, people my age and the local population in general simply cannot afford to rent, let alone buy, the vast majority of these new apartments being proposed. We asked what provisions could be made in the future to make sure that locals are not priced out of the market and what our definitions of affordability meant. There is also a high amount of homelessness in the borough, and local charities are struggling to provide support to the homeless, with donations decreasing after COVID. So we question the possibility of allocating a small proportion of the new developments to reduce homelessness on the streets. We also question the need for large high-rises in tightly packed spaces which are more appropriate for houses, not apartments, as this overshadows the surrounding streets and decreases a sense of community in local areas. We accepted that whilst the council has a limited control over these, it is important not to damage the dynamics of existing communities and dwarf streets. With a large influx of people in the borough, there will be greater pressure on our already crippled local healthcare services, as well as more students into our underfunded schools. We question what could be done to safeguard the quality of these services and other infrastructure in the area in the face of such an immediate increase in our borough's population. One of the other concerns raised was over the protection of green spaces. I think the COVID lockdowns taught us all how important to our mental well-being our local parks are. And whilst the borough does have an abundance of these spaces, we asked how the new flats and the greater population which will follow might affect this. Rather than becoming a concrete jungle, we hope that local developments can include genuine, open green spaces for the local community within them. Staying on the issue of the environment, if we are truly serious about reaching net zero targets, which are so needed for a sustainable world and reducing pollution, local developments need to be at the forefront of this effort. We suggested renewable energy sources on new flats, such as solar panels or geothermal, to provide electricity, as well as the council doing more to make sure that people can cycle safely around the borough. Our final talking point was of crime in local areas. Knife crime and drug use has been increasing recently, and I know that many in my year group, particularly girls, do not feel safe walking around many areas of the borough at night. And we question what provisions could be made to mitigate these fears, such as greater lighting and safer areas to walk and cycle. We can also address the problem of future gangs by offering more services to our young people. Youth centres in particular would help solve this, providing a safe space for teenagers and making the whole of society safer. On the flip side, there was overall a good reaction to the idea of 20-minute neighbourhoods, and also the focus on augmenting the cultural identity of each of the 7 towns, which is important in making these areas desirable to live in for generations to come. I hope some of our feedback can be considered, and thanks for listening.
Thank you. You turn your mic off. Great, thanks. Okay. Okay, we've got our, do you want, no, okay. So we've got our next speaker, who is David Tennant. And if you could introduce yourself and just say kind of who you're representing. Thank you.
Right, I think I've activated this little toy, have I? Good. Yes, I represent Capita Towers, which has run a campaign, as most of you know, for the last couple of years about the Priory Park development. So I'll begin. The National Planning Policy Framework states on page 8, local plans should be succinct, clearly written and unambiguous. Ealing Council has managed to produce exactly the opposite, an impossibly long, rambling, repetitious, frequently inconsistent, and worst of all, unclear, leaving us all befuddled. This general criticism, which seems to be echoed by all the community groups, has a particular relevance to Acton and the Priory Park development. Ealing Council's obsession with building more and more homes, many of them not appropriate to Ealing's real housing needs, has led to high-rise developments on sites not previously designated as appropriate locations for this kind of housing. Priory Park is surrounded by 2 to 3 story houses in a largely Victorian suburb. The council has gone for intensive overdevelopment on Priory Park, and now they're proposing in this plan, retrospectively, to redesignate Priory Park as what they're pleased to call, this is on chapter 4, page 83, they're pleased to call significant development intensity. What the NPPF and the London Plan require is that housing development should be plan-led. Ealing Council has flagrantly reversed this sequence. Starting in 2019, they approved an intensive housing development at Priory Park, now underway. And only now do they come along with their new local plan to propose the redesignation for intensive housing, which they've already set in motion. This is the very opposite of what the NPPF and indeed the GLA require. The plan should come first, then the development, not the other way round. Even more confusion follows when residents come to read in this new local plan on page 122 of chapter 4. It says indicative heights at Priory Park range between 6 and 14 stories. 14 stories? They've already built one of 24 stories. They're they've started 2 at 22 stories, 1 at 18, 1 at 17. Residents don't know what to make of such an absurd contradiction and muddle in this draft. The NPPF says that a local plan should be unambiguous and clearly written. Multiple examples of this lack of clarity and confusion in the draft plan have been identified by other community groups across the borough, not just in housing, but in relation to climate change, equality, infrastructure, open and green space, etc. But the most egregious flaw in the proposed local plan is that this plan reads like an attempt by the council to justify or legitimize some appalling planning decisions made in the recent past, notably at Priory Park and Percival House. Having rejected the principle or the rule of not building huge housing developments in locations where they are totally out of sympathy with all the houses around them, they're aiming to use this new local plan to redesignate more and more areas where extreme urban levels of housing could be permitted. They obviously intend to change the character of Acton, Ealing, and Southall in particular into a hodgepodge of suburban and urban without the infrastructure to cope with that. The result, if these planners get their way, would be a mess, frankly, architecturally, socially, environmentally. We can already see the signs, and this draft plan makes it clear that the council or the planners seem hell-bent on even more of the same. The people of Ealing will not tolerate what they now see as a kind of council-sponsored vandalism. This is obvious from the response that you've already heard tonight, that what I'm saying is correct. One last point from Capler Towers. Acton residents will never agree to proposals to remove MOL protection from Acton Park and Gunnersbury Park. And we promise the planners of Ealing, who have tried to sneak this preposterous proposal into their draft, that any such notion will go the same way as their earlier plans to build even higher towers at Priory Park and also to encroach on the common land of Friars Place Green. Both those plans had to be abandoned. If truth be
Okay.
told,
Time.
the same fate now looks set before this entire draft local plan, given the whole direction of travel not shared by the overwhelming majority of the people of Ealing. The next time a
Time.
draft is attempted, because this one
Can I ask you to
surely
stop
do.
speaking
Well,
now? You've had the time.
I'll finish.
Well, there are other people waiting to also speak.
I just want to quote something that council leader Peter Mason said. From now on, communities will be in the driving seat when it comes to regeneration in Ealing. Local communities need to lead the process of change in the borough. Thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you.
Just to point out, of course, the Friary Park development does have extant planning permission. You're right to point out the anomaly, apparent anomaly in terms of tall building strategy. And of course, there are winners and losers because, of course, we didn't have the draft tall buildings policy when that scheme was originally considered by planning committee. And indeed, there are other developments across the borough where the same would apply. And based on our characterization study and based on the housing design guide that we've produced, we've now come up with a consistent approach in terms of building typologies across the borough. And clearly, obviously, it is different from what has been previously consented.
Thank you.
Is that all you have to say?
So
I thought this was
no,
supposed
no,
to-
no, you're not.
Forgive me, I
no.
thought this
Can you please
was meant to
stop?
be a
When-
conversation.
This meeting, and I said at the beginning that there are lots of people that want to have their say. If one person takes over this meeting, i.e. you, then nobody else is going to get their points across either. There's lots of different community groups that we want to hear from tonight. So, and it's not a Q&A. We've come here to listen to all of the different residents and take on board the feedback from residents as part of the consultation process.
With
Thank you.
respect, Chair, all the speakers received a memo a few days ago to say that there would be 5 minutes for the presentation, and you very kindly allowed me a little extra, and then another 5 minutes was available for clarification. We haven't had that 5 minutes with anybody, and if I ask a supplementary question of Mr. Barton, that is exactly what I thought I was being asked to do.
Right. Clarification on factual points, absolutely. Not a flippant comment of, oh, is that all you've got to say? That I'm not sure if that's going to be helpful in finding out actual clarification on facts.
Well, it doesn't clarify much for me, I'm afraid.
You want to say something?
I should say, in terms of that protocol, which I wasn't author of, is obviously for the committee. I'm just serving the committee. So it's if members of the committee want to ask questions of clarification, it's open to them. And, you know, I would defer to them. And just to say a general point, I wasn't asked to, and I wasn't expecting to respond to each and every individual point. There's some excellent points have been raised by some of the speakers. Some of which I support wholeheartedly. There are others which I have to say, personally, professionally, I possibly take a different view. But it's not our job today to respond in detail to each of the representations. In fact, indeed, it would be premature to do so. Firstly, because the consultation doesn't conclude until Wednesday. And secondly, because, of course, when officers do respond and produce a report for members to review and assess, we must do so holistically, considering all of the representations we've received and not just a subset, important though some of the representations today notably are.
Thank you. Okay, so we have got our next speaker is Simon. I'm going to pronounce your name incorrectly, I think. Yes, yeah. If you'd like to come forward and one of the microphones there, you can.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing us to present to the panel today. Good evening.
My name is Simon PS and I'm church warden at St Nicholas Church, Perivale. And I'd like to introduce my colleague, Kim Booth, who's going to speak to the panel. Thank you, Kim.
Good evening, everyone. St Nicholas Church in Perivale has been in existence since 1930s, and we've reviewed the Ealing, the ELP. There's some current things that affect us, and I think one of the resounding things that we're hearing tonight is in relation to consultation. And at the moment, we're at the top of an industrial estate. We're in the midst where we've also got residential housing. And the challenges that we have as a community is that we have a mission to serve the community, to be a hub for our community. We've got a food bank there, regular worship, and it's an oasis. That was what our vision was for our church when it was rebuilt in 2015. I'm not sure if some of you who elected members were there, but you know, there was a body that came round to look at the existing site, and we had unanimous support for the redevelopment for the church. What has happened subsequently, and this is why it's relevant to the ELP that we're talking about today, is that we had, as part of the planning details for our church, that there was going to be disability access with docking points. Subsequently, those have been removed, and with yellow lines, double yellow lines going through it. And basically that means that when you think about accessibility for our community and in relation to canon law around, funerals, and christenings, baptisms, worship, general worship, using the church as a community hub, that is restricted. That's the first thing. The second thing is that because of where the LTN is placed at the moment, at the upper side of Federal Road, I'm sorry that we haven't got maps that we can show you on screen, but you will see that we've sent you some documentation. At the moment, it's a health and safety hazard. We've got large lorries, HGV lorries, reversing, doing 3-point turns in a small environment in relation to having a school that's close by. So that restricts us from actually being able, as a community, residents as well, being able to do anything in relation to how we serve our community. So the ELP is very, very important for us, because what we would like to see is that there's proper consultation and that we're listened to. Consultation happened, but it did not happen with us as a church and a community. So there are some things that Ealing can do in the short term, but I'm urging you to think about things in the long term, that there's proper consultation when we actually go out to the community. So residents, users, and the other thing I'd say, that in anything that you put into place, there should be a review. There is no evidence that any review has taken place in relation to current events. And what I'm saying is that if we've got an ELP, there should be built in the ability to review, to make sure that it's not having an adverse impact on any element of the community. And I think that at the moment, there's some things that can be done currently. So we're urging Ealing Council, when you do consultation, that you do true consultation and that you remember all the community. Perivale is a vibrant community. There's lots to be achieved in that community. Sometimes we feel that we're forgotten by Ealing Council because of our location. So my and our urge today is, can we have proper consultation? And there's some things that you can do straight away in relation to health and safety and accessibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've had an indication from Councillor Melgon.
I just wanted to thank you so much, Kim and Simon, to come and represent St Nicholas Church in my ward. Perivale is very important and focal point of community. Just wanted to clarify that, Kim, you mentioned LTN, which is not LTN, but I think we have done something which we should be proud of that, because that is a basically school street closure scheme, is not LTN, and it's working very well. And as you all know that I'm working closely with the local community on Federal Road and church as well. And I will happy to continue the discussion with you in terms of that school street closure. Thank you.
Steve.
Councillor beat me to the draw there, so thank you for that clarification. But yes, just to say, I did meet with the respondents and was persuaded that there possibly were some unintended consequences by that scheme, and encourage you very strongly to make representation so we can have another look at that and review that. And clearly, obviously, the issue for the benefit of the committee is obviously the separation of commercial traffic from residential traffic, and obviously trying to avoid some of the adverse impacts that unbridled access from juggernauts and so forth down residential streets might bring, and whether or not there are better solutions in terms of separating out those different types of traffic, which the local plan can deal with. But I think many of the issues that you were raising aren't necessarily local plan issues, they're issues that can be addressed by other means. So I will take that back and consult with people who are more expert on matters to do with highways, etc. in due course, but look forward to receiving a representation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we have got our next speaker, who is Caroline Evans.
Yes. Good evening. I'm here from Five Roads Forum, which is a residential association just near we're south of the main railway line and east of Drayton Green Road in West Ealing. It includes 5 roads, obviously, Hastings Road, Hartings Road, Broughton Road, Denmark Road and Arden Road. And our membership is about 140 people from about 300 dwellings in these streets. So basically, we're concerned that Ealing Council has put out for consultation a draft plan, which actually does run to, over 1,000 pages by the time you've got all the supporting documents and everything as well, and affects all aspects of life in Ealing. But there was only a few weeks for residents to comment. I appreciate Mr. Barton's answered this, but some of that time was pre-Christmas and the Christmas holidays, and appreciate you've also answered that point. But the concern is that Ealing Council will then use this draft local plan as a blueprint for the future without sufficient consultation on controversial proposals, such as the building of large tower blocks and the abolishing of greenbelt land. The draft plan identified at least 115 potential building sites within the borough, with 9 sites in the Ealing town centre area, which includes West Ealing, as being as high as 21 stories. So 9 sites potentially as high as 21 stories. This is a huge number of very tall buildings in an area which has never as yet seen a 21-story building and is currently a reasonably pleasant suburban area. This is about to change, as the council has recently passed several plans for 21-story buildings in Ealing, and the concern is that the draft plan will increase this trend, making Ealing look and feel like a high-rise, totally urban city. This directly affects the roads we live in, which have 2 potential building sites in them in our little 5 roads. One is EA25, 41 Hastings Road and 44 Drayton Green Road, and EA14, which is Arden Road car park. Added to that, we're on the edge of a potential cluster of tall buildings, including the Manor Road plan, which has already been given permission for 21 stories, and the Waitrose site, where the indicative height in the draft plan is 13 stories, although all the campaigners fear that it's going to be much higher than that. This is an area, our little 5 roads, is predominantly 2- and 3-story Victorian and Edwardian houses. Although we are near a Crossrail station and we expect some development, Ealing Council seems to have thrown out all its previous planning guidelines. For example, Ealing Council's development sites document adopted in 2013 has a section on the Hastings Road, Drayton Green Road site, the majestic wine site, and it says, the height, scale and massing of new development must reflect the historic character of the surrounding residential areas on Hastings and Drayton Green Road. New development along Hastings Road must be low rise and not overlook the adjacent two-storey terraced residential properties on this site. And should create a harmonious streetscape and respect the current building line. Under the draft plan, this draft plan, we are now looking at a development of between 7 and 13 stories. However, just recently, a developer undertook a major consultation of local people for two 21-storey buildings for student rooms on that site. We're still waiting for that application to go to council, but the fact that a developer can even consider a building of such a height there gives us no confidence that the council is willing to even keep to the indicative height range of 13 stories in this draft plan. Conversely, in the draft plan, the Arden Road car park has an indicative height range of between 9 to 21 stories. The planning application that has recently been accepted by the council is for 8 stories. Does that mean, due to this draft plan, we can expect an updated planning application for a much bigger building, potentially up to 21 stories, towering over the single-storey church next door, the single-storey fire station next to that, and the 2-storey homes behind it? In conclusion, this draft plan appears to be a cynical exercise to try to fix the planning system in the favour of developers. If a site is earmarked for a 21-storey tower block, then whatever local people say, developers can point to the local plan and say that that policy has already been agreed. The draft plan does nothing to encourage local people to have confidence that Ealing Council's decisions won't be updated, although the council won't completely change its mind over how it wants Ealing to look and the structures it wants built. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So I think that concludes all of our speakers that have indicated that they wanted to come forward with the presentation. We've had some kind of themes that have come through. Sorry, hold on. Yep, got a raised hand.
Is there time for additional speakers?
Schedule.
Yeah, if you'd like to, how many people, because we obviously need to manage the time and have time to conclude.
I'm one. Anyone else? Anyone else want to speak?
No. Okay, if you come forward. Just 2. Okay, that's perfect. Thank you.
If you could grab the microphone there. To ask for clarification.
Yeah.
Sorry. Don't you go press the button or am I okay?
Oh, sorry. Hold on a second. Let me
Thank
just,
you.
I just
Thank
want
you.
this other gentleman to come forward so that the noise doesn't interrupt what you're saying. Brilliant. Thank you. If you'd like to introduce yourself and just say
Is that okay now? Yeah, my name is Robert Harwood. I'm a resident of West Ealing. I've recently been trolling through the local plan. It only came to my notice recently. I've been watching the news of the Oxford 15-minute cities and hearing about the zoning and the modal filters and the businesses which are going out of business. And so I've been worried that whatever is happening in Oxford, and I hear Bath and Canterbury as well, will at some stage come to Ealing. I've noticed that the 20-minute neighbourhood is the equivalent of the 15-minute city. And from memory, chapter 2 verse 22 of your Bible, states that the 20-minute neighborhood will be at the heart. I'm paraphrasing, but some equivalent language will be at the heart of the local plan, and it is mentioned often in the summary, in the summary document. Now, there isn't anything about low traffic neighborhoods in the local plan. However, in the subsidiary documents, there is, so it's like it's hidden. Now, it's very controversial, the low traffic neighborhoods in Ealing, because they were brought in at the start of the lockdown without any consultation. And after about a year and a couple of marches on the town hall and a coup in the council leadership, many of them were taken away, and a few that had more support locally were kept, but that was after consultation. So the fact that there are low traffic neighborhoods planned, there are documents in the subsidiary sections, they're not actually in the local plan, they're in the they're alluded to in the, anyway, there's a document that says there will be 25 low traffic neighborhoods by 2030. And 3 livable neighborhoods. And this is a plan that was written in 2021. So I was thinking, well, maybe this is out of date because that predated the overturning of some of the low traffic neighborhoods. However, it seems that it is a current plan because it states that there was another section of that added to that plan in February 2022, which indicates to me that it's a current plan for 25 low traffic neighborhoods. And there's also a section that says that again, this is not in the Ealing plan, it is in the consultation documents. It says that Ealing Council supports the mayor, I assume that means the Mayor of London, his street space for London strategy or program. Now, if you go and look for that street span for London strategy, there is a document. It says that low traffic neighborhoods are at the heart of the 20-minute neighborhood plan. It was like it's coming down. So there's two places within the subsidiary documents of the local plan confirm that low traffic neighborhoods at some stage are coming here, and it looks like it's being hidden from the public. I think I've said my piece. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so just to be clear, the 20-minute neighbourhood concept is front and centre in the vision for Ealing set out in the plan. And we say by promoting 20-minute neighbourhoods across the borough, most daily needs can be met within a short walk or cycle. That's the sort of summary of the sort of aspiration. And it's very much building on what we learnt in lockdown, that we became more reliant on some of our local goods and services, but we also learnt that access to those services is not evenly balanced across all of the 7 towns or all of the communities across the borough. And is that something which we should aspire to do something more? And we know also that the opportunities for active travel, either through poor public realm for pedestrians or for safe cycling routes for cyclists, often discourages people from being able to take more sustainable forms of transport, which ultimately, of course, has other spin-off benefits, notably in things like air quality and reducing the number of vehicle movements in the borough. We just heard from an earlier speaker about the adverse impact of lorries and juggernauts, for example, in terms of the clean air or the air that we breathe. So there's clearly a balance. I won't deny this has been in each of the workshops and forums that I've been involved in, a bit of a Marmite issue in terms of some people being actively against any form of giving up of road space or street space for other forms of more environmentally friendly transport. I put it no more strongly than that. And others who are saying, actually, if we are going to be a modern 21st century suburb, we need to do more, not just because we need to save the planet in terms of our agenda around climate action, but because we need to be able to provide a better range of goods and services in our local neighbourhoods. So there's a balance to be struck. So the devil is in the detail. I'm not quite sure what plans or documents you're referring to. They're certainly not aspirations that are set out in the local plan. As has already been identified by other speakers, we haven't set out our infrastructure delivery plan yet. So the priorities that we will set in terms of priorities, both for the borough and for local geographies in terms of things such as LTNs, which is one delivery mechanism of achieving some of the aspirations I mentioned, we haven't specified those.
Can you put your mic on so because this is streaming? Thank you.
Sorry.
I recall seeing a document saying that the council has undertaken not to bring in any further low traffic neighbourhoods without the approval of the public. I can't recall exactly what document that is, but I have read that. So we'd like to hold you to account for that.
Okay, could you switch the mic off? I'd need to find out. I don't know what document you're referring to. The only one that I can think of is the fact that we had some clarification on the previous LTNs, but yeah.
Yes, I'm not sure which document you're referring to, but certainly as part of the Labour Party's manifesto in the elections in May, there was a commitment in there that no low traffic neighbourhoods would be introduced without full consultation with residents. That is part of our commitment, or any future low traffic neighbourhoods will be introduced without full consultation with residents. So I assume that that's what you're referring to, but I can't be sure. Yeah.
Sorry, can we? Right, well, this is online, so all the people that are listening online aren't going to be able to hear you. And I've got to kind of follow a semi-structure because everybody wants to speak. So we've covered the low traffic neighbourhoods at the moment. If you come forward and then you can speak. If the gentleman that wants to speak doesn't mind waiting, we'll clarify this. Thank you. And then we'll move on to the next speaker.
This one. Yeah, hi there. Yeah, no, I just want clarification. The low traffic neighbourhood, is that the same thing as the 20-minute cities? Because the London the plan includes that phrase frequently, and many people in Ealing. Oh, and when I say that, not many people in Ealing know anything about this, and I would say that there's a bit of a disingenuous comment that people were mailed about this local plan, and they weren't. And if there were, it was very selective. But all I'm saying is that clarification of what the implication to this borough is going to be on introducing these cities, these 20-minute cities, has to be consulted on every single one before they are ever put in place. Because if you don't, you will have a lot of problems because the residents do not know what's coming down the line.
Right, if you mind turning your mic off, and I've got Councillor Munro here that should hopefully be able to clarify that for you.
Yeah, sorry. Can I think there's some misunderstanding about what a 20-minute city concept is. It's around, during COVID, we realized that people should be able to access things like community facilities, doctors' surgeries, retail premises, you know, the things that you need for everyday life within 20 minutes of walking or using a bike. So there's no plan to create anything else. What we're looking at is looking at the towns and the population centers and trying to make sure the planning system encourages and designates areas where there may be a lack of community facilities, you know, shops, doctor surgeries, so that they are all within 20 minutes reach of most of the population in the towns. So it's not doing anything other than saying we need to have social infrastructure, all the facilities that people may need within 20 minutes, so that you can make alternative choices when, say, you don't need to use a car, you can use a bike, or you can even walk. And so it's not doing anything other than saying people should be able to access, so, you know, local facilities locally, and then they can go elsewhere as well, but they should have that freedom to be able to choose and say, we've got a GP surgery, we've got a pharmacy nearby, we've got places selling food, we've got access to open space, and all of those issues, we try and bring them within reach of people regularly, and that's all it is. That's what the 20-minute city concept is. It's no more, there's no other issue other than us saying we want to provide more facilities for people more locally. That's all there is.
Okay, so for clarification, can we have it absolutely clearly understood that these 20-minute cities, right, will not include the exclusion of vehicles from other zones into those areas?
There's no such plans.
There's no
It's just a bait, that's what the 20-minute city concept is.
Okay. Just one more thing. There's a bit of a contradiction here because you want to create these 20-minute communities, you know, which is fine and dandy, but then you also want to put up massive high rises across the whole borough, which is actually, doesn't make sense. It's dystopian.
Okay,
Sorry.
right. You came forward for the clarity on that, and we've got that on the LTNs and the 20-minute cities or neighbourhoods. With the gentleman that was waiting to speak patiently, if you introduce yourself. Thank you
very much. My name is Jeffrey Payne. I'm a town planner, member of the RTPI International Committee. I've worked for 5 decades internationally on housing and land management problems. And I'm a member of the Community Review Panel in Ealing. I'd like to start by saying, first of all, I haven't prepared anything because I came back from a conference in Turkey yesterday. But I think what's become very clear to me today is the issue of community participation and public consultation. That's been quite clearly a problem, both at the local level on the Community Review Panel, but also generally, because I think we all agree and understand that local governments generally in this country are under great pressure for resources and revenues. We're living in a country which is extremely centralized. 95% of taxes go to central government and are directly influencing or indirectly influencing what local governments can spend. So I fully sympathize with the problems that you face as councillors in managing the resources and meeting the needs of the population. I also fully support the principle of the 20-minute, although in most other places it's known as the 15-minute city. So I think that's very important. How it's implemented, of course, is critical. What I find very worrying is that we are looking at plans and proposals within Ealing which have no basis in social need, no evidence of social need, or environmentally conformity with your proposal to be net zero by 2030. The embodied energy of the buildings that I see coming up are totally incompatible with your policy objective. There is no evidence I can see at any point of social need being met. The significant proportion of existing developments are either empty or being held for speculative purposes. And therefore, I'm very worried that you are allocating land for development and profits, which are inconsistent with your social responsibilities and are destroying the very qualities that make Ealing an attractive place in which to live and work. Now, I'm not just a professional, I'm a father and grandparent. And I was very impressed by the young speaker this evening, who spoke about concerns for the future. And I really do worry that what you are doing and what you are overseeing in this local plan is going to destroy the qualities that make Ealing an attractive place in which to live and work. You will not be achieving your environmental policy objectives of net zero. If anything, we're hearing that you will be exceeding the emissions and creating more and more pollution. You will be putting further demands and pressures on local facilities, social facilities, and public services such as health and needs for youth, for young people. So I urge you to scrap this plan, to start again. And let me tell you about one place in Brazil, not one of the rich countries in the world, which actually decided, in order to get support for its own very limited resources, it introduced what they call participatory budgeting. And in that scheme, the council say what limited resources they've got, they highlight the key areas of policy which they think need to be addressed, and they put those out to widespread public consultation on a far more open basis that you have done for this plan. And that means that whatever you decide will command widespread public support. What I suggest you do is to scrap this plan, put it on file, and then highlight what you consider to be the key policy objectives. And I would fully support the 20-minute or 15-minute plan, ideally. And go and put those out to a genuine public consultation. Go to schools, invite schools to participate, go to churches and religious faith group communities, go to other groups such as the Stop the Towers, the Ealing Transition group I'm a member of. They've been trying to work with you. Go to all those diverse groups, say what the priorities you want, and invite proposals and groups to work with you. And I'm sure then you will have a plan which will command public support. Thank you very much.
Sorry, let me stop this. Okay, I've got, yeah, I've got Councillor Newstub who wanted to say something.
Hi, I'm quite a new councillor, so don't jump on me. I fully, it's great to sit here and listen to everyone's input. I really value it. I just wanted to make one point because, you know, these are all really important discussions. And it's about why we build and why we develop. And, you know, we can all debate this endlessly. There's a development in my ward in Hanwell where it's very easy to look at the flats that do probably cost in the region of £500,000–600,000. They don't look very affordable to any of us or to what we consider affordable. But that development has delivered 35% when it opens will be genuinely affordable and will allow us to house the people, some of the people, a tiny, tiny proportion of the thousands of people that we have who are homeless in Ealing alone. And it will allow other people to take advantage of shared ownership and to get on that housing ladder that we would hope that everyone would be able to do, which frankly, probably most of us in this room were able to do. And, you know, I doubt my children will be able to do. So I do think when we're having these conversations And I have a great deal of sympathy, certainly with the environmental aspects, that we really need to consider the needs of those people who can't be here. And I do really particularly appreciate the last speaker talking about how complex and difficult the decisions are that face councillors, because it is, you know, it is an overwhelming set of considerations that you have to make at times. But that development in my ward, as I said, 35% of those houses will go towards making permanent, affordable homes for our residents. And in the last month alone, I have spoken to 4 families who are living in bedsits with their children, who have terrible mental health issues as a result. Most of them are in private housing, because that's where we end up having to put them, because we don't have any housing stock. And I'm not sitting here trying to guilt trip people or to say this is a binary thing, but one of the key things that we have to do is build for the most vulnerable people in our communities. And I'm not saying they're easy decisions, but I would hope that we would all consider those people who don't have a voice.
Thank you. Steve, did you want to come back on any of that? Thank you.
Really, just to end on this point, really, obviously, the planning system is not perfect. We have to work within a national and regional planning policy framework, which requires us to do some things which perhaps even councillors perhaps would aspire to do differently, perhaps. And that doesn't just speak to resources. I mean, the authority has lost 64.5 pence in every pound in government grant over the last 10 years. So it has substantially reduced the ability of the council to do all the things it would aspire to do. And that's just talking about meeting the needs that have been evidenced in the very substantial evidence base that has already been accumulated to support the local plan and will be further supplemented in the coming months before we get to the next stage in local plan making. And it's also true for the rest of the public sector. You know, as a professional planner, speaking personally, one of the great frustrations is when we get a scheme and we get very substantial planning obligations money to invest, for example, in a new health hub, and we provide new purpose-built, purpose-designed infrastructure, we then discover the health authority can't afford to pay the lecky bill or to provide the staff to populate that facility. And that's just, I'm afraid, the reality of the system that we're working in, which is, as I say, is less than perfect. And don't get me started on the housing market, where, you know, the authority used to be a major player in terms of delivering affordable housing. And now we've been reduced to the sidelines. And I think it's to the credit to this administration that it is building and it's planning to build far larger levels of affordable housing, generally affordable housing, than has ever been aspired to in recent times, in the face of great difficulties in terms of lack of government grant and a system where the market is dominated by a small number of high volume house builders. So the challenge is great, and the barriers to delivering affordable housing are very, very great. I've got 2 teenage children who I rather hope will eventually fly the nest. And I don't see how that's going to happen without substantial aid from the bank of mum and dad. And I know when I speak to young people, and as we have been doing across the borough, the concern about affordability, both to rent and to buy, is genuine and is heartfelt. And I think, you know, there's some major challenges for the council on that, major challenges in how we deliver the infrastructure that we aspire to provide. And we know those needs are clearly evidenced, but the funding isn't always there to provide those missing components. And so there'll be some difficult decisions ahead.
Thank you. Councillor Ball.
Yeah, thank you. So, point of clarification, that one thing that came up from quite a number of the residents was the point about the de-designation of metropolitan open land. And you know, reading through the local plan and the supporting documents, including the land study that goes through that, can we have clarification? Because in some places it seems to be saying essentially, don't worry, this is a technical change, the sites will still have protection through other means. And in other places it's saying you know, we need to open up additional land for development. So, I mean, how can those both be correct? Can you clarify that?
No, that's a really good question. Thanks for the opportunity to answer that. I mean, firstly, can I just be clear? The existence of Greenbelt MOL designations has not always protected those bodies of land. We've seen encroachment, we've seen building on MOL and Greenbelt in this borough. Some of those, I think, for very good reasons. For example, we built a new secondary school on what is currently MOL on the former Barclays Sports Ground, because there is a very acute need of secondary school provision in the borough. And even with the 3 schools that we opened during COVID, we are still a net exporter of secondary school age students to neighbouring authorities. We do not have enough secondary school age capacity in the borough, even with taking a decision that was on a non-policy compliant designation. So the heart of the premise is that we want to have the right planning policy designation for each of our green and open spaces. Failure to do so runs the risk of potential challenge, and we've experienced this, where developers say, well, actually, this piece of land doesn't meet the test for Greenbelt as set out in the NPPF, doesn't meet the test for MOL as set out in the London plan. I would also argue, again, that the suggestion that having multiple planning policy designations offers greater and more protection, it doesn't. Having the correct designation does, and most of the Greenbelt will be redesignated as metropolitan open land, and those bits, those limited parcels of MOL that will be de-designated already have a designation as public open space or community open space. There will be some limited tidying up of boundaries to reflect the reality of built development on the ground, and I think that's right. No review has been conducted in more than 3 decades, and I should know because I've worked for the authority for most of those 3 decades. And in relation to the last point, which I think is the central point, unlike many authorities in the rest of the Southeast, where there is an acute shortage of developable land, we're not in that position. 23% of the borough is Greenbelt MOLs currently constituted. And if you included our parks and other open spaces, significantly more, and adds to our reputation for green and open spaces in the borough. Although I should say there are pockets of the borough where there are deficiencies in access to open and green space, and the plan does separately seek to address that, particularly in parts of Acton and in Southall. But we are not, fortunately, because of the reservoir of previously developed land in the borough and the repurposing potentially of that, we're not in a position where to meet our very high, very challenging, very ambitious housing delivery targets set by government and the mayor. We're not in the position where we are seeking development on green and open spaces. Generally, that's not the position that we're in. We're not reliant on that to meet our housing supply targets, and that strategy clearly spells that out. Where we have talked about the possibility of some limited development is in the context of enabling development, and that's solely and only to secure improvements to the existing green and open space network. And we've been very transparent about the examples where we think there is some opportunity for that. The former Barclays Sports Ground site itself, as I say, part of that has already been taken over for a school. That site remains inaccessible to the public. It is in private ownership. There is an existing built footprint, which includes a substantial bit of hard standing. Is there an opportunity for us to reuse that built footprint to provide some new facilities, which may include some housing to enable it, to provide access to that site, not just for the neighbouring school. In fact, we have a state school on one part of the site, and neighbouring the other way, we have an independent school, but also to provide access to the local community for a wider range of sport and recreational facilities, as reflects the status of that land in planning policy as community open space. Another is Old Actonians, a well-loved, well-used, well-regarded. My son used to play football there, opposite Gunnersbury Park, where you have, to be blunt, a set of Dickensian dilapidated buildings which purport to be the sporting leisure facilities for that site, which clearly need to be upgraded and modernised, but there is no funding to do so, but clearly a strong aspiration to do so. And is there scope given the size of the existing built footprint, for some limited enabling development, some housing in this instance potentially, to pay for the upgrade and reprovision of those sports and leisure facilities. And I believe is to be tested, and it'd be interesting to see the views that we receive on that site, that you could actually achieve an outcome subject to viability where you actually could reprovide the sports and leisure facilities in a slightly more logical way with a better design, and actually potentially increase the green footprint, because there is such a substantial amount of hard standing, but mostly given over to car parking spaces. So there is an opportunity there, and that's one of the things that we've consulted on in the plan. And we will take account of any views and representations that we receive. I would say that in both instances, the landowners and the neighbouring social and community facility providers have been very keen for us to encourage a debate about some of these things, because they're keen to see an improvement in the facilities and the accessibility of those premises. So if I've achieved nothing else, I've achieved a conversation, a debate and a discussion.
Thank you. Sorry, you wanted to, is it a point of clarity? Yeah, okay, go ahead.
I think for some of us looking at the plan, the difficulty is that it doesn't make clear what it's trying to achieve. And so I've heard from the councillor that about housing need, and I think most of us around here would totally share that sympathy. The difficulty you have as we go and look at individual sites, we can't find it. I mean, the ones I looked at, all very expensive flats, often for sale in China. So I suppose my question to the councillors, well,
Yeah.
can I just finish the question? Because I haven't got to the question yet. So my question is really this. If the plan is being presented as mainly to deal with housing need, and I think there's about 22,000 over 15 years housing units mentioned somewhere in the plan anyway, if I got that right, then what we would like to know and what we'd like to understand as residents is what proportion of those are truly affordable, not £500,000 and you have to get a 25% payment. You only can mortgage a quarter of it, and then 40 years later you've got a quarter of a flat, but truly affordable. And what percentage are sold overseas or somewhere else? And we get no feeling for that. And so if, likewise, I think all of us have total sympathy with the fact that councils are strapped for cash and that their budgets are being cut to the, well, practically zero, I understand, from central government. And we understand their limitations. We just want an honest explanation. Okay, are we financing this by selling some flats to developers? Because the one up the road from me seems to have the same number of affordable homes on it had when it was the previous state on the old sausage factory as it does now, as it will have, sorry, except instead of that number, now it's got 1,000 fancy flats on top of it, towering over us. Was that done just to pay for the upgrade, or we just lost really? It's not obvious. Yes, thank you.
Councillor Munro will come back to back on that thing, but just to say that you know, as Steve has already mentioned, quite often it is developers that are building, and as part of the requirement, which is not a law that the council have come up with, it's a government law around a proportion of those being affordable. I'm sure Councillor Munro will clarify that in better detail than me.
Sorry, yeah, can I sort of clarify? Look, we have a broken housing market, in this country. So you have sort of large cities where, yes, people are building where those homes are totally unaffordable. And really the word affordable has been debased, because I would say the Conservative government, but the Conservative government indicated that they thought affordable meant 80% of market rent. And in most parts of London, 80% of market rent is absolutely not affordable for most of our residents. It's so high that it's just totally up. You might as well not bother because the rent is too high. So we, in our last manifesto and the previous manifesto, said what we want is genuinely affordable homes. And we classify genuinely affordable around, it should be no more than a person's about average income in an area, about 30% of their average income should be what they should be paying in rent or whatever to be able to afford those homes. And we think that's a really good definition. So you look at the local area, and around about an average of 30% of people's average income in that area should be used for housing costs, right? And we try and do that. The problem is, if the land belongs to us, it's public land, we look for 50% of the homes built to be genuinely affordable. We can't always get there, but that's, and we'll sometimes have to have shared ownership or whatever to make that scheme viable. Because if you ask for a scheme to be developed and built, and you can't afford to build it, zero building means zero affordable homes. So sometimes the market makes us compromise. Where it's a private developer, Ealing asks for 35% of those homes to be split between 60% being totally genuinely affordable, like there's lots of different definitions, sort of social rent or local housing affordable rent levels, where the mayor's changed some of the definitions and we have to follow the GLA. So any development so the Wicks development that my colleague was talking about, when we gave it permission, 35% of those homes would be bought up at a very reduced rate by a housing association. Yeah. And then they would we would allocate people from 11,000 people on our housing waiting list to those homes. And those homes would always be available at those genuinely affordable rent levels. So what happens is the other private homes are sold and they have to subsidize because the housing association pays a very low rate for those homes. So they can afford to then rent them at very, very low rates. So that's how we try and see. And yes, some of those homes do sell for 500 and 600,000, but they are subsidizing 35% of those homes in that development to be able to be affordable to our people on our housing waiting list. And that's how we work through these issues. And yes, I do get upset, and I'm also upset when they offer the private homes in Singapore and elsewhere. But we can't control that. We're a local housing authority. We're not the government making the laws of the land. They're perfectly able to sell them to whoever they want. But what we get in return is things like 106 payments towards transport, education, health, as well as 35% affordable homes out of any scheme that's built. And it is difficult, and it's really, really difficult. And people think, all the homes being, sold overseas, we should stop it. We don't have the power. We're a local council. We have to follow the law of the land, and we're not all powerful. And we can't do all the things that people might want us to do because we have to follow the law. But this is how we work through, and we've promised in our new manifesto from 2022 that we will try and get 4,000 genuinely affordable homes built. In the previous term, we did 2,700. Now, I think that's, if you have a look in London, that's one of the largest numbers that been promised by local authority. It's going to be really difficult, but we are ambitious, and we have 11,000 on our housing waiting list and growing. So it is a really difficult issue to have, and we have to manage with, but that's how we do our affordable, genuinely affordable homes. So when people criticize us sitting here saying homes are not affordable, yes, the private ones aren't, because those are sold and they subsidize the 35% that are generally affordable. And that's how the system works.
Thank you. Oh, Steve, you wanted to come back and then I'll conclude.
I just wanted to add one other thing. That was a really good summary. Obviously, if there's one policy you support in the plan, and I hope there will be others that you will, please support policy SSC on page 478, which is about small sites contributions. Because things are even worse than Councillor Manro actually just outlined, because we don't get any affordable housing contributions on minor developments, i.e. developments of less than 10 units, which is the bulk numerically of the planning applications that the local planning authority processes. So if our target is 50%, but a large proportion of the planning applications that we determine provide us with none, we've got to work that much harder from the remaining pool of major developments, which provide more than 10 units. So the loophole, as I call it, which, to be fair to the mayor, he tried to close in the London plan, but was prevented by the independent inspector appointed by the government. That loophole we're going to attempt to close in the local plan. So, I would urge everyone to, if you're going to say anything kind about my draft plan, please do so in relation to that policy, because it will try and address some of the issues that many people have raised in terms of affordability.
Is it a point of clarity?
Just a point of clarification, which I think will be useful for the record, that lots of numbers have been given on housing supply and units built, but I note that Ealing hasn't published its land supply figures or housing supply figures for, I think, at least 3-4 years. They're overdue. We've been expecting them for 2 or 3 years. I think the Ombudsman's told Ealing to publish them. Do we have a date for when they will be published?
It's in hand, and in fact, actually, the Reg 18 consultation is a big opportunity for us to fill in some of the blanks on the spreadsheet, because we'll be able to provide far greater confidence in terms of the future pipeline, the feedback that we get in terms of assessing deliverability. So it's in hand. I acknowledge we do need to provide that data, although again, just to put it in context, whilst the headline figure in terms of planning permissions and approvals looks very healthy, of course, we all know that planning permissions, not all planning permissions gets translated into housing completions. Depending which study you refer to, conducted by the Mayor Molière, anything from 1/3 to 1/2 of planning permissions are obtained by people who have a track record of building nothing at all, actually, speculative. So we also have a housing supply target of 2,149 net additional homes per annum. And of course, the London plan now has been in operation for a couple of years. So we've never achieved that target. So we already have a substantial backlog just in terms of the current London plan. That's in top of the housing backlog we have in terms of identified housing need that's been identified in historical strategic housing market assessments or assessment of housing need in the borough generally. So we are playing catch up in terms of the level of housing delivery that is necessary to meet minimum standards in terms of need in the borough. So a little bit of background in terms of some of those figures. There is a housing topic paper which sets out where we are and what information we have at the moment and what we're intending to do. And there will be more information published very shortly.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to summarise and close the meeting. I think that we've heard from all of our speakers, and I wanted to say thank you to every single one of you that has come tonight and has made your representations for your local area or your group that you represent. I think it's been really interesting for us as a panel to hear it, and also for the officers to hear it too. So there were some kind of themes that came through, housing being number one, who would have thought? So around kind of the environment side of things and kind of social needs. So we've got, there's a lot of food for thought. The consultation doesn't close until the 8th, which is next Wednesday. This Wednesday? Yeah. And so once that's closed, then all of the kind of representations and all of the feedback will be taken on board. And then the next step of the process will happen further on down the line. So thank you, everybody, for your participation. And thank you to the officers as well for kind of clarifying key points as well. Thank you. Just to note, the next